Welcome to All Things Social Security. Enjoy your video. Hey, good morning, afternoon, or evening. Welcome to All Things Social Security. Today, we're going to go over composite jobs. I don't think it's given nearly enough credit, and I think it can be a really valuable tool to present, I would say, at every level. And whether or not it's going to work on the initial and recon is a whole nother story. But when we're going for an ALJ hearing, this is something that would have in my brief. All right. So let's get to it. It might seem boring, but it's really not. And it's so applicable to so many jobs. It's going to be particularly important. It really applies to step 4 of the sequential evaluation process, which applies to all cases, but it's particularly pivotal for those over 50 because of the grids. But the people below 50 have to pass step 4 also. So let's get to it. All right. So let's put together an article on this because it's going to go up on the website. But we're talking about why a composite job can be your advantage at step 4. And the example we're going to use is furniture salesperson. All right. So let's get into how it can be strategically decisive in your case. And again, we're going to use a furniture salesperson, but it can be applicable to so many other jobs. You need to understand this because it can eliminate, like I said, one of the Social Security Administration's most common denial steps, and that is step 4, which is you can do your past job as it is generally performed in the national economy. Remember, there's generally performed, and there's as you performed it in that particular job. So step 4 kind of has those two little prongs. So at step 4, the SSA, just to be clear about what it is, and we do have a video on the sequential evaluation steps. And I think that's actually a playlist in and of its own if you wanted to look at that. But anyway, the step 4, the SSA is asking a very narrow question. Does the claimant retain the residual functional capacity, RFC, residual functional capacity, to perform past relevant work? The SSA's current governing rule on how it evaluates past relevant work is the Social Security Ruling 24-2P. There had been a previous one for years prior to that, but in 2024, they, with this ruling, they kind of tweaked it a little bit. So at step 4, the SSA often tries to deny a claim by saying one of two things. One, you can do your past work as you actually performed it, which is what you put on your work history report or testified to at hearing. Or 2, even if you can't do it the way you personally did it before, you can do it as generally performed in the national economy, often by pointing to the Dictionary of Occupational Titles and how that job is described in there as to what kind of exertional capacity it needs and other capacities, manipulative, postural, etc. So SSR 24-2P explains that the framework that the SSA uses to make that past work decision can be really helpful. And here's the key. That generally performed shortcut does not apply the same way when the claimant's job was a composite job. Composite job. So what's a composite job, of course? It's essentially a job that's a hybrid job, a position that combines significant duties from 2 or more occupations, so much so that there is no single DOT companion that can be applied as the same. No companion job that captures what the person actually did. So the SSA POMS is also explicit on this point, and you can look at POMS. D particular POMS states that a composite job does not have a DOT counterpart, and therefore SSA should not evaluate it under the generally performed in the national economy part of step 4. And let me just add this in. It is so important to be able to get rid of that generally performed, because the way we often do our jobs, they are a lot harder than the way they are described in the little job description when we took the job. You know, a retail manager is managing, it's a little pedestalish. No, they're often in there with their hands getting dirty, lifting heavy things, They basically pull the weight when someone doesn't show up. They got to do that part of the job. It's all the jobs that everyone else does, plus they have to manage the whole spiel. So that's just an example of what I'm talking about when I say what we do on the job is often different than the cushy little job description. It's because employers are trying to not have to hire two people and have twice as much expense. Maybe hire one person that can do both jobs, pay him a little bit more, and you saved having two people on the job, which saves a ton of things, including workers' comp and many other bills that come along with it, payroll, taxes. So that whole business about getting rid of the second prong of generally performed in the national economy, you no longer have to prove that if your job was a composite job. That's invaluable. You do not have to prove that you can't do a job the way they cushionally describe it in the DOT or elsewhere. So let's look at the furniture sales job as a real world example. It's kind of a perfect example, and I'm dealing with one right now, so that's why I wanted to put this out. And again, it always looks simple on paper, but the complicated real life job of the story is not. So on paper, someone might say, I was a furniture salesperson. So what did that actually involve? As they describe here, and in my case, in many stores, especially smaller operations, a furniture sales job can include customer service and closing sales, continuous standing and walking on a showroom floor, rearranging heavy items for floor display, ding, 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 that's my main point, loading furniture onto vehicles, unloading deliveries, assembling pieces, or working the warehouse and inventory, all those things. If the claimant's furniture sales job required meaningful, ongoing physical duties that look like warehouse work or delivery work, those duties are not just minor add-ons. They can be substantial, and they can transform the past relevant work into a composite job. And when it is a composite job, as we know, the SSA is not allowed to pretend the claimant did only the easy, clean salesperson parts of the job. They have to look at the whole thing. And so here's the strategic point about it when you're defending your claim or pursuing your claim, putting your claim forward. If the job is not a composite job, the SSA can try to deny you at step 4 by saying, even if you can't do it as you did it, Johnny, you can do it as it's generally performed elsewhere. See, we have this description of how it's generally performed in the economy. So, you know, you could, in theory, go to another place and do it as generally performed. But the POMS, the one I mentioned above, which is the DI 25005.020, it tells the adjudicators at the SSA, do not use that generally performed analysis for composite jobs because a composite job has no DOT counterpart. So if your furniture sales job included significant lifting, moving, loading, or warehouse duties, those are substantial components. If your RFC now prevents you from performing any substantial component, your current RFC, the way you are physically now, and hoping to convince the SSA of through your medical evidence, totally different prong, right? So if your RFC prevents you from lifting sofas, lifting that 40, 50 pounds, frequently bending, prolonged standing, or meeting a pace requirement, having to move fast enough, then you cannot perform that composite past relevant work. SSA cannot rescue the step 4 denial by stripping out those duties and relying on a single DOT salesperson description to deny you. Super, super important, guys. I think it goes unused far too often. I really do. And I think there are so many composite jobs out there. I mean, look at my job. My job is a composite job, if you think about it. Yeah, I'm a lawyer, so that's sedentary, no heavy lifting. That's BS. When I buy a new printer, and I'm looking at mine right now, it's like 2 feet by 2 feet, but it's extremely heavy, and it's also very cumbersome in size. Now, granted, I don't have to do that very often, but when I do rearrange the office or move things around, I do have to slide it, move it. I'm not usually, if I'm picking it up, I'm usually just moving it from one thing to another thing. So I try to like slide it over on its current table to put it on a different table. I would say that's also true when I'm cleaning, because as the owner of my own little law office here, who do you think does the cleaning? Who does the printer buying? Moi. So in theory, I'm doing a lot more than just sitting behind this desk that people don't see, right? It would not be in the DOT description of a Social Security disability lawyer. All right. So let's see. If we go back to SSR 24-2P, it sets out how the SSA evaluates the past relevant work and the evidence needed to support findings at step 4. When the SSA evaluates the work as generally performed, it typically uses the DOT to identify an occupational counterpart. The rules might be changing on what they can consider as the source, whether it's DOT or something else, but let's just go with general. The POMS DI that I noted above, 25005.025, slightly different, explains that evaluating the past relevant work as generally performed starts with locating the DOT occupational counterpart. And if there is no DOT counterpart, SSA cannot do a generally performed evaluation unless there is other reliable occupational information evidence. Now put that together with the composite job rule, and now you got your strategy. The composite job equals no DOT counterpart. So for composite jobs, the classic DOT-based generally performed step 4 denial is effectively off the table. And that's to your benefit, of course. That is why composite classification is very powerful for claimants and SSD attorneys and non-attorney reps as well, of course, as we represent them. So from a practical standpoint, if you want to use this advantage in, say, a furniture sales case, you have to develop the record. You do not want your work history report to be reduced to sales. And we see this problem a lot because when people have jobs that they consider white collar, a lot of people will never mention the bluer collar aspects to that job. Whether it's ego, but it wasn't in my official job description, so I can't say it. Yes, you can. You're an adult up. Yes, you can. You could speak the truth. It doesn't have to be in some official document. You talk about exactly what you did. Bring in that blue collar manual labor aspect of the job. You might want testimony and work history detail showing, and I'm just going to go through a little list here we put together, what was done daily and weekly, how much lifting and the weight ranges, how often loading and unloading occurred, whether warehouse duties were routine, and whether those duties were essential to the job. I would add, if something is done every 2 weeks, like every 2 weeks we have to rearrange the whole store. Yeah, that's only every 2 weeks, but guess what? It's a pretty major component. And if you're expected to be a team player and do that with the team, and you can't do it, it might be that you're not actually a really good fit for that job, right? Because that was one of the job things that were expected of you, whether or not they told you about that when they hired you, and it might not have been in your job description. So I wouldn't stick with only daily and weekly, but I would definitely start there. Sometimes people have, what do you call those things? Those events. Oh gosh, what are they called? You go to different fairs and stuff and they set up their tables. Big companies do it, like Anderson Windows does it. Potentially a furniture store might do that, where they are displaying stuff in a new setting to try to get people's interest and all that, and maybe get their name out there. People have to set those up, move that furniture. Those things might only occur twice a year, but it's a big day. It might be a whole week. It might be a whole weekend, particularly if it's indoors, it might be. You have to think about all those things, not just your, that's what I'm saying, not just your daily or your weekly, although you don't want to forget about those either. Those are the first ones you hit upon. But when there's other ones, and if you're not sure how often it is, how often that heavy lifting for that event or that less occasional chore was, then say it was occasional. It wasn't every day. Maybe don't get more specific than that. Because if you get too specific in your guessing, you could be putting a fork in your case untruthfully, because now you're guessing. So maybe keep that vague. We had to do this occasionally too. It was expected, but not daily. Leave the vagueness up to them to pick it out. If it's a lot of bending to the floor, a lot of reaching overhead that you don't really think about. Sometimes when people work in an office, this is just a little tangent, guys, for another kind of job. I'm an office helper or assistant, administrative assistant. We perceive someone sitting at a desk using a computer and or a phone all day long. A lot of times, those people, even the office managers, are going into the stock room, getting, let's say there's 6 printers, they're getting a whole box of reams of paper. They're not doing it every day. Maybe they're doing it once a month. But that's, you know, a box of a ream of paper at $5 a ream, 5 pounds a ream times 8 reams or 10 reams, that's 40 or 50 pounds. And we don't think about that. We did that. And could we do that now? Or would it be unsafe? So I would be talking about how I was responsible for bringing out the boxes of the ream of paper to restock or make it available to restock the printers. Same with cases of water bottles. Do you restock the employee refrigerator? A case of water, all right, I'm not going to do the math here and I forget what it was, but I think it puts us well into the 20 pound, above 20 pounds. By the way, that puts us into the medium exertional rate, not the light rate. When you're carrying a case of 12-ounce bottles, should I do the math? 20, be nice if I get my phone to work. 12 times 24 is equal to, oops, divided by 16. So at 20, I might be doing my math on that. Puts us at 18. That puts us up to the highlight. 12-ounce bottles, that's typical, right? Times 24 equals 288 divided by 16 ounces per pound, 18 pounds. If you have those bigger packs, like a 30 pack, it would be higher than 20. So sometimes they have bigger bottles. Sometimes they're carrying a 4-pack of gallons. It really just depends on what you have to do. Sometimes people have to carry a mop bucket and it holds 3 gallons of water. 3 gallons, like the industrial ones for like a commercial place. 3 gallons of water. If water at a gallon is over 8 pounds, we're talking well over 20 pounds. We're now into the medium weight range. Well, I only had to do that one time a week, you know, when we were bringing out the mop bucket. I'm like, well, you still had to do it. Bring it in. And then all those like higher exertional duties that you mentioned that are part of the job that you had to do, whether or not it's part of the DOT explanation, you're going to want to link those duties to the RFC limitations, the residual functional capacity limitations that either have been established or you are asserting exist based on the medical record. So for example, let's say you can still talk to customers, but you can't lift more than 10 pounds occasionally. You cannot stand 6 hours, or you cannot sustain the pace of the job that you are at. If that's the case, then you can't perform the furniture sales composite job as it was actually performed, even though you can still do the talking to the customers. So if you go back to, and I know I mentioned 2 POMs here, so make sure I say them right. I think they have the same number except the last 3. So we have 0.020 and 0.025. In this case, the DI 25005.020 SSA makes it clear that they should not be pivoting to generally perform to deny the claim when this composite job, such as this furniture job, exists. All right. Now, step 5 is a little different, so we just have to get into this. It's a pretty significant clarification. Winning the composite issue at step 4 does not automatically win the whole case, because SSI can still move to step 5. And this is definitely important for you under 50 people. The same DI POMs that I mentioned above that ends in the 0.020, it also notes that at step 5, the SSA may consider whether the claimant can adjust to other work and may consider skills gained from the composite job as in a transferability analysis. So that's a whole nother aspect of transferability to skills. So step 4, to get rid of that, use the composite job, but recognize that it's not going to just say that, well, then you can't do any job. No, you were just saying that you can't do the job you had the way you used to perform it. And they're not allowed to consider that job as it is generally performed. But now there's, you know, in theory, there's 12,000 occupations that they can consider for you. And when the RFC knocks out 90% of them, now you got 10% left that you still got to knock out with other limitations, residual functional capacity limitations. As you know, once we get over 50, we have some medical vocational rules that apply to us and assist us because we are over 50 and our ability to adjust to all those other very different jobs becomes more limited. Fact. It's a biological fact of aging. So, and while we are all held to the same degree of standard of to what extent our ability to adjust and transfer skills and all that comes into play, And I don't think they overdo it at all. So I'm hoping they never change the level that it's at now, certainly not to reduce it. We all get the use of the same rule. Some of us probably needed it at 48 because we just mentally got off track with adjusting quickly. And then some of us could go till 62, but they can't apply and try to figure out how millions of people, each and every one, would differ. So they give us a very nice and cozy rule that we are allowed to apply to all of us. So, and I should add tangentially, if you are 48 and you feel that that's a big, strongly an issue, you can try to prove the mental incapacity, but you'd have to then do that not with the grid rule, but through the mental health cognitive testing you've been having and the weekly therapy and the maybe occupational therapy to try to build those skills back. So that's a little bit more work. So we really love our medical vocational rules. It adds a level of fairness, I think, to the aging folks, the people over 50. That is definitely on point with realities. Anyway, the bottom line in the end, guys, a composite job can be your advantage because it prevents the SSA from denying your case by relying on a very simplified DOT version of the job as generally performed. It gets rid of the generally performed, and it's all about how your job was that you performed that you can no longer do. If you develop the record correctly, the composite job rule can force a proper step 4 finding of unable to perform past relevant work. For those of you that do need to go to step 5, like the under 50 crowd and some of the over 50 crowd, if they were not able to prove that their RFC exertional level was within the category required under the medical vocational rule for their age range, they too will want to be looking at step 5. So it all goes back up to getting your proper work history report done. I drill this home all the time, endlessly. And that's why we don't let a work history report go out without us having reviewed it and discussed it with the claimant every single time. It is unfortunate when we get cases that the person's already applied and done the damage already. We still take those cases, but we often do a adjusted new work history report. And I explained that the client didn't know she was supposed to include all these real life things that she did at her old job. So we can usually make that work, but ideally you don't have a judge having to decide whether you're credible now or credible when you first did it. I think that's all I wanted to share on that. Don't forget that it all does depend on your RFC. Remember, we tied in the RFC, and that all depends on how robust and vigorous and aggressive you're being with getting medical treatment for your physical problems. Yeah, and mental, but for sure physical. So, you know, I have clients who have financial constraints. It's an unfortunate thing. Sometimes I'm always nagging about, well, can you maybe downsize a little bit on that thing over there so you have the money to, you know, pay that copay and get to the physical therapy? You know, maybe don't take that. I don't know. Maybe cut back on your broadband a little bit. Whatever it is, sometimes you just got to get creative. It's a temporary time period when you really have to get the most robust and aggressive evidence you can get, because no one's going to just assume you are disabled. That would be wrong, right? It has to be by proof. It can't be, you know, because you say so, even though you're for sure telling the truth. If that were the case, then all the liars would be in the system too, and then we would all fall down. Everyone's got to have the evidence, and it's through continuous, robust following for all of your impairments, not just the ones that bother you the most. I am the nag hag about it, so I will continue to do it. Composite jobs, guys, it is the bomb. I'll talk to you later. Bye.